The best state to start your LLC depends on your personal situation. If you are going to have an office or employees, or you're like physically doing work in a particular state, you need to be registered in the state where you're doing business. Like, for example, if you're a plumber doing business in New Jersey with a plumbing service and you've got trucks driving around, you've got a shop, that sort of thing, it's going to be better that your business is registered in New Jersey because you have what's called nexus or physical connection to the jurisdiction. You have employees, you're paying your employees and withholding payroll tax on those employees. So you need a state tax ID number in that state to be able to effectively withhold their payroll tax. Now, there are like payroll services that can handle some of that for you, but you still need to have a state tax ID number. And it makes it easier if you're registered in that state. A lot of it has to do with where you're physically performing the task of what you're doing. Now, one option is for example, you can have a Wyoming LLC registered to do business in New Jersey in that example. And so in some cases that might make sense. Like if you're looking for a bit more privacy, maybe you want some anonymity because New Jersey is a state where you would have to disclose like members or managers' names in the registry with the Secretary of State. Whereas Wyoming, we can register it without disclosing members and managers' names. And then we register that Wyoming entity to do business in New Jersey. We do that often with people who own real estate in California, for example. We'll register a Wyoming LLC to own the property, but then we register that LLC to do business in California because otherwise they have tax issues there. What I mean by that is if you're a resident of California, and let's say you own a 10-unit apartment building, when you file your tax return as an individual, you're going to file a federal tax return and then a California state tax return. And if the California Department of Revenue sees that you're earning income from an LLC registered outside of the state of California, they're going to hit you with fines and penalties and basically force you to register that LLC in California because you live there. California is actually the only state that is so strict about that. If you have income on your tax return and you live in California, either need to have a California registered LLC or, a foreign registered LLC like a Wyoming LLC registered to do business in the state of California. The advantage of having it like that would be you get a bit more anonymity in your business or your assets if you care about that sort of thing. If you are running a virtual business, you really can register in pretty much any state as long as you don't have employees. I mean, just for example, let's say you're living in Atlanta, running, let's say, a software business, like a SaaS product business. If you have employees, actual W-2 employees where you're withholding payroll tax on them, you need to be registered in the state where the employees are located. In a lot of cases, maybe you outsource everything, or you have contractors, or maybe all of your employees are non-US. Maybe you've got a developer team in Serbia or Ukraine or something like that. If you're living in Atlanta, Georgia, there's no reason you can't register that company in Wyoming, for example, or Delaware, or New Mexico, or Nevada. There's no reason you can't register it in a different state. And there could be some advantages to that when it comes to, again, like I said, the privacy and anonymity of it. But you just got to be careful about like where your physical employees are located, and do you have a physical space, like an office space, where you operate, because those do constitute nexus and ECI.
What if the owner is based in a certain state and they don't have an office? Like if they work from home, can they still do that? With your example, they have a home in Atlanta, but their business is online. They're obviously doing some work for it, but they're not an employee.
In that scenario, let's say the owner lives in Atlanta, but it's a completely virtual business. All the team lives outside of the U.S., or they're 1099 contractors, and he does not pay himself a salary. He only gets like a profit distribution. Then yeah, you can do that. It can be registered in Wyoming. If the owner says, I want this to be taxed as an S-Corp, so he wants to file the IRS Form 2553 to elect S-Corp tax election, he will be required to pay himself a salary at that point. At that point, he would either need to register a Georgia LLC or register the Wyoming LLC to do business in Georgia, because as a state resident of Georgia, he would need to withhold his own payroll tax at that point.
Any other thoughts on which state to register on?
Wyoming is kind of our go-to state for most people that have virtual businesses if they don't have that nexus or ECI in a particular state, or if they live abroad, or if they're non-U.S. people, Wyoming is kind of our go-to state. It's quick, it's easy, it's relatively low cost. It's not the cheapest state to register an LLC, but it's not expensive. It's not like Delaware or Nevada or California, something like that. Very good with anonymity because we don't have to record your personal details with the Secretary of State. So a lot of people really appreciate that. So their name is not in public record anywhere. Nevada is virtually identical, except Nevada is a lot more expensive. The state fees are much higher, and they have a state business license that you have to pay for. So a lot of people say, why not Nevada over Wyoming? Well, you can do either one. As far as we're concerned, we could care less because we collect your state fees when we register it. That's not any money that comes to us. So we could care less if you spend more money with the state. So do what you want. But if you told me you were thinking between Nevada and Wyoming and you're asking my advice, I would say Wyoming only because it's cheaper. Delaware is an interesting option. It is very well marketed. It is very well known all over the world as a place to register entities. God knows how many millions of LLCs and corporations that are registered in the state of Delaware. I will say for the vast majority of people, Delaware is just not a great option, mainly because they're pretty antiquated in their registration process. Like I can still register and I can do the registration with a Delaware or for a Delaware entity online. However, Delaware does not give you the confirmation of the registration electronically. They mail it to you. That takes anywhere from 2 to 3 weeks to get your documents back from the state. And a lot of times people, they want to register an entity. They don't want to wait 2-3 weeks, another month to get the documents back. And you can't do anything until you get those documents back in your hand. Don't be confused. We do expedited filings by default in the state of Delaware. We don't do standard filings in Delaware because basically our customer service would be a nightmare if we did that, because standard filing is anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks. And then they mail you the paperwork, and that takes another 2 to 4 weeks to get it back. So you're looking at 1 to 2 months if you do standard filing in Delaware. So we do everything expedited, 24-hour expedited filings. But that's what we do with the Secretary of State, is we do it and they complete it in one day, but they still mail us the documents, which takes 2 to 4 weeks to get the paperwork back. So just because we do expedited doesn't mean we get the document back expedited. Delaware is extremely slow. The reason Delaware is so popular is they have a specific court system for business disputes called the Chancery Court System. It is a separate court system than just the normal court system like in every other state. Like if you had a business dispute in, let's say, Florida, you could be in court behind 10 other people in line that could be a domestic dispute, a divorce, a child support case. There could be 20 other things in front of you online. But in Delaware, they have a specific court only to handle business disputes. And that makes it attractive for people doing business with you. So, for example, in your business, if you need large funding sources, if you're raising money from VCs, if you're going to go take the company public, or if you're going to get large credit lines from the bank or other financial institutions, they view Delaware as an attractive jurisdiction because if you default on, let's say, your loan, it's really quick and easy for them to sue you and get resolution. So it makes it more attractive for funding sources if your company is registered in Delaware, which makes it more attractive for you in turn because you're looking for these funding sources. So it does make it more attractive in that regard, but unless you're looking for large funding sources, I would say avoid Delaware. It's not really worth the hassle. They're also much more expensive. The fees in Delaware are depending on a couple of options. With LLCs, the fees are about 4 or 5 times what it is in Wyoming. For corporations, if you're registering a C Corp in Delaware, the cap on fees is $200,000 a year to renew your Delaware C Corp based on the number of shares outstanding and your share value. For example, if I register a C corporation in Wyoming, it's the same fee no matter what. There is no additional fees for different number of shares or different par value of shares. And so it's always a couple $100 to renew it. In Delaware, it can go all the way up to $200,000 to renew your LLC. I'm sorry, not LLC, corporation. You've got to really, really have a reason, in my opinion, to register in Delaware to make that justifiable. Like I had a client 2 years ago. We originally registered his corporation. He's a German guy. We registered his corporation in Wyoming, and then he pitched his deal to some investors, a couple of VCs, and the VC said, we'll invest. We'll give you $2 million, but only if it's a Delaware corporation. They didn't want to invest in a Wyoming corporation for exactly the court system reason I just mentioned. And so we had to move his company over to Delaware for that. It cost him a lot more money to have that company in Delaware. It's a lot more of a hassle. It was worth him getting the $2 million, if that makes sense. I would avoid Delaware unless you really need the funding sources or have a specific reason to be there. New Mexico is also a fairly common jurisdiction, mainly because New Mexico is very private and it's cheap. They don't have annual fees after your first year. I mean, you still have to pay the registered agent fee and compliance, but you don't have any state fees anymore. You don't file an annual report in New Mexico. For some people, that's attractive just because of privacy issues. Florida also seems to be a common jurisdiction. To be honest, I don't know why. The address of being in Florida, I guess, is attractive for some people. But from a liability standpoint, Florida is not very good. For single-member LLCs, they have a lot of case history where people have been sued and their sole asset was a single-member LLC. And the Florida court system has just bypassed the structure itself and taken assets of the LLC to satisfy judgments. Whereas that can't happen in Wyoming or Delaware or Nevada. But Florida, if it's a single member LLC, they just consider kind of an extension of the person. And if you get sued, they'll just take your LLC assets. I don't see Florida as a great option unless, now, if you have multiple members in Florida, it's fine because then you're protected. For single member LLCs, Florida's pretty terrible. Those are the most common states for most people. South Dakota also is kind of, let's say, an honorable mention. South Dakota also is a zero tax state, low regulations, really easy to register, pretty simple, more or less about the same as Wyoming. It's just not as well known. Wyoming is the first state to implement LLCs in the U.S., so they have the longest history and it's more well known. South Dakota is also a pretty decent option.
If you'd like Business Anywhere to help you create an LLC, use the link in the description below and enter the code BEGIN15 at checkout to save 15%, excluding the state fees. If you'd like to see the step-by-step process of creating an LLC with Business Anywhere, watch this video right here, and I hope to see you in another video. Bye-bye.